This is Middle East Now. I'm your host, Bianca Zanini. Let's begin with tonight's headlines. U.S. President Donald Trump makes his first phone call to a foreign leader, to Saudi Arabia's Mohammed bin Salman. Just 3 days before the ceasefire agreement with Lebanon expires, Israel is said to ask for another month to withdraw its troops. And Iran tells world leaders it is not pursuing nuclear weapons, but that it's gotten much closer since Trump left the nuclear deal in 2018. U.S. President Donald Trump made his first phone call to a foreign leader, and he chose Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio spoke on the phone with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, reiterating his support for Israel. These two calls highlight Donald Trump's stated goal to expand the Abraham Accords with a normalization agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia. More in this report.
In an indication of President Donald Trump's priorities for his second term in office, his first foreign phone call was made to Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, an indication of his desire to expand the Abraham Accords with a normalization agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia. The deal would likely be part of a defense agreement that Riyadh is looking to sign with Washington, which would provide Saudi Arabia with security guarantees from the U.S. and also lead to investments into the American economy. But the Saudis have long made clear that such a deal would require the establishment of a pathway to the eventual establishment of a Palestinian state, only intensifying that rhetoric since October 7th, making clear that an end to the war in Gaza is necessary before normalization talks can proceed. Similarly, the UAE, which Israel has sought to recruit to play a role in the post-war management of Gaza, has also stressed the establishment of a reformed Palestinian Authority as part of that process. Also Wednesday, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu held his first phone call with Marco Rubio since the latter became America's top diplomat. A readout from the State Department said that Rubio underscored that maintaining the United States' steadfast support for Israel is a top priority for U.S. President Donald Trump. Rubio also emphasized the importance of furthering discussions regarding post-conflict planning for the governance and security of Gaza for the longer term. However, a two-state solution has been categorically and repeatedly rejected by Netanyahu, who has stated that Israel will continue to oppose unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state.
Mike Wagenheim, i24 News senior Washington correspondent. Mike, thank you so much for joining us. There's always the symbolic message with the first diplomatic phone call, right? A new leader in office chooses to make this call. What's the message here?
Specifically with Donald Trump calling MBS or with Rubio calling Netanyahu?
Well, both.
We're getting definitely both. Well, there's no doubt whatsoever that it's imperative for Trump to call his old friend up, MBS. They've had a relationship, or at least through Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, a relationship even through the down years, even through the last 4 years. That relationship is kept up. Trump says, although he was only half joking, it seems, that he'd go visit MBS there in Saudi Arabia for about, what did he say, $450 million or somewhere like that in Saudi investment in America. With Trump, it's for better or worse, it's the dollars. He wants Saudi investment. He wants that relationship that leads to dollars for America, that leads to dollars possibly for his son-in-law in his own ventures. So no surprise whatsoever that that's the call there. And of course, judging by what's going on in the Middle East, the broader region, it would only make sense that that would be an important call for Donald Trump. Insofar as Marco Rubio's call to Benjamin Netanyahu, Rubio's just been calling everybody. I wouldn't read too much into it that he called Netanyahu today. He's been calling the leaders of Indonesia, of the Philippines, of,
Mike,
he called the Canadian
Right,
foreign
let's talk
minister.
about
So,
that
yes.
conversation with the leader of Indonesia, because this comes after a report came out that the U.S. is considering sending temporarily some of the Gazan residents to Indonesia during the build-up, rebuilding of Gaza. What do we know about this?
It's something I think that was just kind of thrown out there off the cuff. I don't think there's anything to it. I can't imagine for a moment that Gazans, after all this time and absorbing the war, would suddenly opt to leave there. There are a million complications and a million provisions and a million logistical challenges that would be put into place, not to mention that just the philosophical challenges in moving Gazans out of there. There's always that a kind of a vision, that kind of prism that everything needs to be seen through of, will they ever be allowed to return? That's the way the Gazans often feel. If we leave now, will Israel allow us to return? So just the fact that they're going to airlift all these Gazans out and put them in Indonesia for a year, 2 years, 5 years, a decade, however long it takes to rebuild the Strip, just doesn't seem very logical. I think that was more off the cuff than anything else.
All right, Mike Wagenheim, thank you so much for joining us. And with me in the studio now is Dan Perry, international affairs analyst and former Europe and Middle East editor for the Associated Press, and I-24 News correspondent Balir Sladin. Now, clearly, this is an important policy goal for Donald Trump. It's also in the interest of Israel, but how much is it in the interest of Israel? What is the price that Israel is willing to pay? We know that the Saudis are saying any normalization has to come with a pathway to a Palestinian state. Is this something that Netanyahu is willing to go for?
Well, you have to distinguish between the interests of Israel and
the Israeli government at the moment.
Of Netanyahu and the Israeli government. Given everything that's happened in the war, I would say that Netanyahu clearly is going to prioritize his government's survival. From his perspective, if, heaven forbid, Saudi Arabia actually says, yes, we'll normalize relations with Israel in exchange for, let's say, the PA being restored to Gaza and talks beginning, a process beginning that may one day lead to Palestinian statehood, something I believe is in the interest of Israel, that would bring down his government. Clearly, would threaten to bring down his government. Then you'd have other internal Israeli scenarios, like if Netanyahu is inclined to accept this, the pressure would become enormous on Israeli opposition to replace the far right in the government, create a unity government for the express purpose of these things, which, again, I can't emphasize enough, would be in the interest of Israel. But the way things are shaking down now, it seems far more likely that that none of that will happen, and that there will be all kinds of bad karma around the talks towards the second stage of the ceasefire deal, and there will be great fears that the deal might fall apart and the war resume.
Right. But Valer, I want to ask you, because it's not that there has to be a definite Palestinian state before this can happen. They're saying there has to be a pathway to a Palestinian state. How defined is this pathway?
Well, first of all, the Minister of Strategic Affairs, Ron Dermer, just yesterday, in a rare appearance in front of the Knesset, said that there is nothing that Israel has given that guarantees the pathway to a Palestinian state. That's something that Israel is considering it to be a red line. Now, if we take in consideration what the Saudis want stability, after all. They want this defense pact with the Americans that includes also normalization with Israel. And they know that as long as a group like Hamas or Islamic Jihad are in charge of the Palestinian and any future Palestinian state, there will be no stability in the region, and that's, of course, not in their interest. So I think that the interests of the Saudis and the Israelis are aligned here, that Hamas cannot take any part in the future Palestinian state. That's something that is unreasonable for now, because they have the power and they have the popularity. At least 80% of Palestinians that live between the river and the sea do support Hamas and do support the October 7th attack. So this is something that, of course, Israel needs to work around in order to reach. I'm not sure whether the Saudis will be convinced of any sort of promise from the Israeli side for this that will not bring down the government, as the gentleman here has said. So I don't think there is going to be any easy solution for this, after all, for the Trump administration to reach this in the next 4 years, unless we actually take down Hamas from Gaza and from the Palestinian territories in general.
If we do find a way to make this deal happen, normalization happen, you're talking about Israel's interest. What are the more tangible interests that Israel can come out of with a deal? Is it basically money? Is it more security? Are there bigger things at stake here behind the Saudi-Israel deal?
Absolutely. I mean, Israel already has relations with Jordan and Egypt, as we know, and it has the Abraham Accords, and Saudi Arabia is the big missing link, basically. And there's an assumption that with Saudi Arabia would come Qatar, and after that, in the later stage, perhaps other Arab countries.
So this could really change the dynamics in the region.
Iraq.
It can be huge.
It absolutely could be phenomenal. And once you have that, and once the Abraham Accords have expanded, and there's a sense of peace in a region, that makes the region becomes more investable, basically. There should be more prosperity for everyone. And in the case of the Palestinians, Israel would not necessarily be paying a price in moving to separate itself from Palestinians, but it would be rather making itself more viable as a country, in addition to, in the eyes of many people, doing the right thing for the Palestinians. Now, there's a couple of really major things here. One, as was just said, sure, the Hamas still has a lot of support. I don't know if quite as high as 80%, but it has a lot of support.
That's according to the polls,
yeah,
the Palestinian polls, yeah.
I believe that when I see it. I doubt that would be the result of an election. But it's certainly true that there's majority support for the October 7th attacks, which is shocking. Now, this doesn't make the Israelis feel good about giving up the West Bank and letting whatever happens there happen. And maybe, who knows, Hamas or Islamic Jihad or Al-Qaeda takes over the West Bank within a stone's throw of Tel Aviv. These are big problems. So what to do with Hamas is massive, and how to make it so that Israel's bedrock condition, I'm sure, which is demilitarization, in the sense of the Palestinian state, will be accepted. So a lot of pressure needs to be applied, a lot of carrots and sticks need to be applied, and it won't be so easy. But right now, the government of Israel doesn't seem to understand that a basic partition deal is in its interest. And that, I think, is long-term fatal for Israel. So you really must distinguish between Prime Minister Netanyahu's a real, I mean, almost mania for staying in power no matter what, and what is Israel's long-term interest, which is to find a way to somehow square the circle. Because otherwise, let's be clear, if Israel does not partition from the West Bank and Gaza, then Israel's not a Jewish state. It's half Arab and majority Arab, maybe, very, very soon. This is something the majority of Israeli Jews don't want. I don't know if the majority of Palestinians want. It would be a binational state, which might not work so well. That's the outcome.
Before we get into that discussion, Dan Blair, stay with me. I want to bring into the conversation Loy Al-Sharif, a peace activist and expert in Arab-Israeli relations. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Now, it seems that the possibility of normalization with Saudi, according to the guests here in the studio, is very low. One of the reasons we saw the Hamas onslaught on October 7th was exactly this, the growing possibility of a normalization between the two countries. And now we've had more than a year of war and these fragile truces both in Gaza and of course, in Lebanon. What are the chances of that happening? Do you agree that they're very low, or do we see an opening possibility once again?
I see it happening quite faster than we all expect. I know that many people don't really share this opinion, but I know the region very well. And from what I can tell, yeah, it's not going to happen, how to say this, within a month or two. But I would say maybe 2025, we will see a great push for this peace agreement between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And before I joined the channel just now, I wrote an article on my X account, and I said how the pathway should look like to those countries that preconditioned the Palestinian state, or a pathway to a Palestinian state before normalizing with Israel should look like. And I made it obvious that not a single entity or party in Israel would accept a terrorist state on its neighbors ruled by Hamas or Islamic Jihad or other terrorists. And it will not be only a threat to Israel, but it will be a threat to the entire Middle East. But if you have some sort of a commitment towards having some sort of sovereignty by the Palestinians over some territories, if you have a Palestinian leadership that is willing to live side by side with Israel and de-radicalize its population and having peace while doing so, this could be actually the next thing that we see in the Middle East.
All right, and while the leadership in Saudi Arabia might seem ready or open at least for this sort of commitment or deal with Israel. The population, not so much. How much pushback would establishing ties between the two countries see domestically in Saudi Arabia?
I do agree with you. The population is not ready. Still, great hate for Israel, especially after the October war. But we have to understand that this is like something that was expected to surface after the war. Now, it will take them time. But the great thing about Saudi Arabia and other Arab states that we are monarchs. We follow the leadership. If the leadership says it's in our best interest to have this kind of relationship, and the people of Saudi Arabia genuinely love Prince Mohammed bin Salman, trust Prince Mohammed bin Salman, follow Prince Mohammed bin Salman. So if Prince Mohammed bin Salman comes in the open and says, well, you know what, this is the greatest thing that we can do right now to push the Middle East for more peace and prosperity, most of the population will follow. But of course, you will have some resistance. And people in Israel and people in the Jewish world have to anticipate that as well. It's not going to be easy, but at least you would have some sort of a move towards something that would make it people to people like the UAE, instead of having a security agreement peace like the one in Egypt and Jordan.
All right, Loy Al-Sharif, thank you so much for joining us this evening and for bringing, I guess, a little bit more of a positive angle to the discussion.
I remind you, before the end of 2025, we will have a great progress.
All right, we'll get back to you and see if that happens. Hopefully you're right.
Of course.
Now, Israel officially has 3 days left to withdraw its troops from southern Lebanon. That's the 60-day deadline given in the ceasefire agreement with Lebanon. But now Israel is reportedly asking for an additional 30 days to cease its positions. According to the IDF, its soldiers continue to locate weapons and Hezbollah infrastructure, adding that the Lebanese forces who are meant to take over for the IDF have deployed too slowly, delaying the withdrawal. Now, Israeli media reports that the US and France are discussing the requested extension, but that President Trump has said that he wants a full withdrawal by Sunday. Hezbollah also released a statement saying they will not accept any violation of the agreement. All right, and still with me in studio, Dan Perry and Balir Sladin. The deadline is coming up. Are we surprised that Israel is coming up with a request like this just 3 days before the deadline?
No, we shouldn't be surprised because the question was for me, sorry.
Yes.
Sorry. We shouldn't be surprised because even a month ago, Al-Akhbar newspaper, which is actually close to Hezbollah, said that there is a plan for Israeli presence in 3 hills, at least in the eastern front, in the western front, and also in the center, that will oversee the south of Lebanon. That's something that has already been reported a month ago. Now, Hezbollah's statements today, although that they do say that we will not accept any violation of the agreement, any extension of the 60 days that we have agreed upon, but they did not actually say that we will take action. They are still throwing the responsibility, let's call it, over for the Lebanese political level, and they are saying that the government needs to actually pressure the mediators in order to pressure Israel not to stay in Lebanon. Now, while we're talking, and it's already past 7, it has been reported that the cabinet is meeting in Israel specifically to discuss this issue in order to represent the challenges for the Trump administration for why Israel actually needs to stay in Lebanon, and without any concession from the Trump administration and also an acceptance from the Lebanese government as well. That would be a great excuse for Hezbollah also to attack Israeli troops there, maybe to kidnap Israeli soldiers, and also for them to tell their rivals inside Lebanon, we told you so. Israel doesn't want just to, they are attacking us just because they want to settle in south of Lebanon, and not because they are just responding to our 8th of October attacks when we started them back in 2023. So this would be actually, at least in my view, a mistake in terms of if Israel wants to keep Hezbollah's power inside Lebanon weak as it is right now.
All right, and Dan, I want to ask you here, the clock is ticking. Sunday is the deadline. What are we going to see Monday morning if Israel is not going to get its extension?
I don't think Hezbollah wants to restart the war because they were thrashed too badly. And I don't think Lebanon wants to see the war restarted because because they seem to be on a pathway to a far better place, given the events of the past 4 or 5 months with a new president and with some hope that Hezbollah will be cut down in size. So Israel would appear to have leverage, but I would urge, I think, Israel not to use that leverage. In the next few days, they're going to have to present the Trump administration with incredibly compelling evidence of why the deal is falling apart and why they can't pull out, or a clearly doable plan that is something Lebanon can agree to, that accelerates the implementation. And it's in Israel's interest to do that as well, because the way the Lebanon part of the war went down essentially was a victory for Israel. And it is not in Israel's ultimate interest to mess that up and to make it fuzzy and to give Hezbollah excuses. So I would think this is an occasion for the U.S. To put its foot down and to make sure that all sides are complying with a deal that was good for all sides and that all sides signed, which reflects a bigger thing here. That there's a narrative in the world that the U.S. power is waning and that the Trump administration is very focused on domestic things, and the landscape before us tells us something else entirely. Rarely has...
At least here in the Middle East.
All over the world, Ukraine also. Rarely has an incoming administration had so much power to really make history.
And before they even took office.
Indeed.
Now, moving on, 13 Palestinians have been killed in a major IDF Special Forces counterterrorism operation in the West Bank city of Jenin and the Jenin refugee camp. Operation Iron Wall was launched Tuesday with the goal to neutralize the so-called Jenin Battalion, which includes operatives from Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and other terror groups. The raid is expected to last several days and is absolutely ongoing. Balir, what more do we know about the ongoing operation, and what is the latest information we have?
Well, first of all, the operation is not happening only in Jenin. It's actually also outside of Jenin in the villages around, such as Burqin as well. And also some clashes were reported to be in Halhul, north of Hebron. And it's apparently expanding, but I guess that the focus is on Jenin. Now, Palestinian locals are reporting some sort of coordination between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. That's happening after 46 days of clashes between the Palestinian authorities.
Yeah, they had their own operation there.
Yes, and they failed. Ultimately, they failed. They didn't get what they want, which is the dismantlement of the armed groups there that are aligned with the Islamic Jihad specifically, but also with the Hamas and other armed groups in the West Bank. And now Israel is stepping into this place and trying to arrest them, but also because in the past as well, it happened that Israel would siege Jenin, but they would actually run away before the siege, and they just come back after Israel withdraws or pull back from the area. That is not happening right now. From what I understand, at least 10 people were arrested. Most of the Jenin battalion was arrested by the PA. Just moments before I entered the studio, I've seen a video for the governor of Jenin. He was in the funeral of the two operatives that carried out the operation in Funduk a couple of weeks ago. And he was actually shouted at. He was said, they told him that he's not welcome there because he is from the PA. He's a Fatah guy. It means that there is an ongoing debate inside the Palestinian Authority as well about this coordination. But in general, I would say that this is happening after some red flags for the Israelis of this many advanced tactics that the armed groups in the West Bank are using. We've seen even yesterday explosive drones being used for the second time over Yitzhar in the West Bank, and that's added to the planted explosive and the even rockets that they have shown over the past few years.
All right, Dan, I want your input on this. Jenin and the surrounding area is a pressure cooker, and it has been for years. We just heard about the PA's own operation there for over a month it lasted, and honestly, the IDF has been there, has been operating there, has had this focus of trying to dismantle the rise and recruitment of terrorists in this area specifically for years. Why is it not getting better?
Well, Jenin is a particular hotbed of radicalism, obviously. Back from the days of Zakaria Zubeidi in the second Intifada, that was one of the places where the fighting was most severe. The PA has never really been able to control that for most of the period of its existence. But as regards these efforts, it says two things that are important about the PA. One, they did try to do the bidding of peace, basically, in the past month or more. They did try to control Jenin. You could say they were trying to impress the Trump administration in order to be given a role in Gaza. You could say a lot of things that are cynical, but it looked like they tried, and that should hold them in good stead going forward. It also must be said that they failed, as
right.
indeed was said, and that suggests that they might fail, for example, to control Gaza.
Right, I was going to ask, how does that affect directly their chances?
If we're to believe both of these narratives in this complex dialectic, then maybe the PA does deserve to be given a chance to rule Gaza again. In fact, I hardly see an alternative. But if they are allowed that, then they must be given help. And it must be in the framework of a rejiggered and improved PA with massive assistance from the Arab world, probably, whether it be troops from the UAE or whatever it might be. They're going to need help, otherwise it will fall apart rather quickly.
All right, Balir Sadine, I-24 News correspondent, thank you very much. And Dan Perry, stay with us. Now, as the deadline for the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon is coming closer, Israel's ceasefire deal with Hamas is only just beginning. Top officials from the U.S., Israel, and Egypt are reportedly kicking off negotiations already for the second stage of the ceasefire deal. Now, just 5 days after its implementation, Israelis are now holding their breath for this coming Saturday, when Hamas is supposed to release the next 4 hostages held in captivity in Gaza for more than a year now. And we go live to Hostages Square in Tel Aviv, where I-24 News correspondent Emily Francis joins us live. Emily, this ceasefire and hostages deal is an emotional roller coaster for most Israelis. Joy to see the hostages return, worry about the fate of those still there, and about the next batch coming home. What's the latest on where the deal stands, and what are we hearing from the relatives of the hostages?
Hi, good evening. So, the relatives of the hostages are actually pretty quiet right now. I mean, this tended to be the case, even during the original hostage deal on day 40, knowing that their loved ones are going to come home. They're realizing better to not make so much noise. So they're being pretty much circumspect. Similarly, not so many protests at the Kiryat. So like you were saying, a lot of nervousness, joy at the return of the three women that we saw firsthand, a very historic moment. But, being present with that happening does not negate the fact that there's still a long way to go and many lives in the balance, and also not necessarily knowing who is going to come back alive and who is no longer alive. But the list of names that we've been talking about that Hamas says they will release by Friday for the Saturday release deal. They say it's going to be 4 women. We have 6 women that are being discussed. So think about that. 2 are going to be left behind. So the ones being discussed, Leary Albog, as we know, Karina Ariev, Agam Berger, Daniela Gilboa, and Naama Levy. So, these women also have become quite... well known is not the right word, but they were also the ones that we saw very, very early on, over a year ago, when they released that initial video of them in captivity. A chilling video. And of course, Leary Albog, we saw another video from her a few weeks ago. So again, psychological terror. Whether the deal will go through all the way or not still begs the question. But again, there are still a lot more phases to go beyond these 42 days. Everybody committed to bringing all of their family members home, dead or alive.
All right, Emily Francis, live with us from Hostages Square in Tel Aviv. Thank you very much. Now, the first 3 hostages released from captivity in Gaza were returned to Israel last Sunday. One of them was Emily Damari, who returned with a bandaged hand missing 2 fingers, but sending a message of strength and hope to her country. The image of her hand has become iconic, even inspiring tattoo artists and those choosing to be tattooed. Yuli Solomon of the I-24 News Hebrew channel has this report.
January 19th was a historic day for Israelis. Tens of thousands have expressed their feelings on social media, embracing Doron Steinbrecher, Romy Gonen, and Emily Damari with love and support after their release from Hamas captivity. Some decided they wanted to immortalize the gesture Emily made upon her return. Her wounded fist, raised in a victory gesture despite 2 missing fingers, has inspired many.
It's a sign of love and a reminder that we should learn to love one another without hatred.
We were watching the moments of freedom while working, and later that night, I saw the photo of her gesture circulating online. As soon as I saw it, I realized it was iconic. As a tattoo artist, I immediately saw it as a stencil. It was perfect. Then I noticed an emoji had been made of it, and I thought, this combination is incredible. I knew I needed it. The next morning, I turned to Eden, our tattooist.
It's incredibly moving to create this tattoo. It represents so much: emotion, significance, resilience, and heroism. To me, it's a way to commemorate something meaningful to all of us.
This gesture also means I love you in sign language, which only adds to its iconic status. But more than that, it symbolizes willpower, determination, and positive energy. That's its true meaning.
This hand gesture, combined with Emily's radiant smile, has gone viral worldwide.
My brother's wife lost her cousin Yossi Avrahami in the Ramallah lynching in October 2000. We currently live in New York, and over the past year, we've noticed many artists wearing pins with the bloodied hands from that lynching. When I saw Emily, when she was still in the helicopter, make this gesture, I thought, this is our response to the bloodied hand symbol. For me, it represents the Israeli spirit, victory, resilience, and steadfastness. It was very important for me to get this tattoo here in Israel before returning to New York.
It feels something else to be here, like in this week, with how emotional everything is, and you don't have to worry about it. Like, we know when we come here, we're with somebody who's with us.
Emily's gesture has become a symbol of the strength and resilience of a young Israeli who never broke, even in the darkest place on earth. It will serve as a source of hope and strength, especially for the hostages who are still waiting to return home.
Now, U.S. President Donald Trump has redesignated the Houthis in Yemen as a foreign terrorist organization. Apart from sending a strong signal, the decision will mean harsher economic penalties on the Iran-backed group and its sponsors. It came in response to the Houthis' repeated attacks on commercial shipping in the Red Sea and U.S. warships. Here's more.
U.S. President Donald Trump has redesignated Yemen's Houthi movement, known formally as Ansar Allah, as a foreign terrorist organization. The move means the Houthis will face increased sanctions, cutting them off from international financial systems and resources. It also allows the U.S. to target individuals and entities supporting the group, which Washington blames for destabilizing the Middle East. Joe Biden lifted the terror designation in 2021, concerned about the ability of the UN and other humanitarian organizations to deliver aid to civilians in Yemen. But since November 2023, the Houthis have carried out over 100 attacks on ships in the Red Sea, sinking 2 vessels and killing at least 4 seafarers. These actions, they claim, were in solidarity with Palestinians amid Israel's war against Hamas.
The actions that we've seen from these Houthi forces are destabilizing, they're dangerous, and clearly a flagrant violation of international law. And so this is an international problem that requires an international solution.
The Houthis have signaled a reduction in their Red Sea operations after a ceasefire in Gaza came into effect on January 16th. On Wednesday, the Houthis released the crew of the commercial vessel Galaxy Leader more than a year after seizing it.
We emphasize that this release was coordinated with our brothers, the fighters in Gaza. Yemen had earlier declared that these people were under the disposal of our brothers in Gaza, and their release was based on this coordination and communication.
However, the Houthis continue to hold dozens of UN staff, as well as scores of NGO workers and other civilians. The Trump administration says its designation as a terror group sends a clear message that the Houthis' actions will not be tolerated.
Joining me now from Washington is retired Colonel Rich Altston, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Now, along with this designation, what can we expect to see from Trump militarily? I mean, the Houthis have said they'll limit their attacks. Are things just going to be quiet on that front for a bit, or what are we going to see?
We'll see. So President Trump has made it a priority to restore U.S. deterrence, and I think part of that means that the Houthis, as well as their Iranian sponsors, should understand that, as he did with Qasem Soleimani, he's not afraid to strike in the region in a painful way. Yet at the same time, it's clear that President Trump prefers economic warfare. So part of what he's done by relisting is symbolic in that he says the delisting by the Biden administration of the Houthis as a foreign terror organization essentially damaged and undermined U.S. deterrence. And this puts them on notice that they are once again sort of in the crosshairs. But it also means that we will be, the United States government, that is, will be reviewing all USAID projects, all contracts, all humanitarian assistance that might in some way be benefiting or profiting the Houthis in Yemen. So it'll be an economic approach that will be painful for them, pending the outcome of the deterrence experiment to see if they behave.
All right. Now, hours before Trump's decision, the Houthis decided to release the crew of the Galaxy Leader cargo vessel, which was hijacked more than a year ago in November of 2023 at the beginning of the war. The crew of 25 people, we had 17 Filipinos, Ukrainians, Bulgarians, Mexicans, and 1 Romanian. The crew was released to the mediators, largely forgotten, though, by the international media for over a year. What does this release signal now from the part of the Houthis?
Well, there may be, on the one hand, there may be some truth in what they say, that this has been coordinated with authorities, Hamas authorities, such as they are the de facto authorities in Gaza, and that now that there has been a movement on a prisoner and hostage exchange deal, that this is seen as sort of part and parcel of that. On the other hand, this may be sort of prudent self-protection. I think the Houthis know that Trump has an economic sense and a business sense towards the region. And while the Houthis haven't lifted what they call sanctions on Israeli-flagged shipping, the fact that they're not going to be going after third nation flagged shipping, which really has sort of choked off much of the commerce in the Red Sea, attracting the attention of big shipping companies like Maersk and also the United States. It affects us economically as well as the Saudis and others. It may be an attempt to guard themselves from more forceful retribution on the logic that they're letting the commerce flow.
All right, Rich Outzen, thank you very much for your input this evening.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
And back in the studio, Dan Perry. Trump already designated the Houthis as a terror organization last time he was in office. And the Biden administration chose to reverse that, saying that it had major consequences for the population in Yemen that was already facing a humanitarian crisis. What kind of consequences can we expect to see for the Houthis and the population in Yemen now that the sanctions are likely going to be imposed and this designation is going to be imposed?
There are 2 levels of designation for being a terrorist. Biden didn't declare them non-terrorists, just not a foreign terrorist organization, rather a specially designated global terrorist or some such.
He took away the designation and then put part of it back.
The new designation means that the U.S. could gravely imperil humanitarian aid and even just commerce and goods coming into Yemen, into any area controlled by the foreign terrorist organization. And that would be happening in a country that's already unbelievably impoverished, and it would cause great suffering to the population. Now, I think it's not terribly unfair to Trump's humanitarianism to suggest that he cares less about this than Biden did. That was what was animating Biden. But it's more complex than even just that. Biden proved rather knee-kneed vis-a-vis the Houthis for over a year. They impeded 1/3 of global container traffic headed to the Suez Canal, caused Egypt incredible damage, and very little was done to them. Probably the most effective strikes against the Houthis were Israel's own strikes, primarily in the port of Hodeidah. The Houthis were allowed to get away with something absolutely insane. I think by doing this...
For quite a long time.
I literally can't explain it. I don't know why the Americans were so weak about allowing the Houthis to do this, except, I suppose, for thinking that that's just the way it is with Yemen. But that's very cynical, because no country deserves to be run by the Houthis or indeed by Hamas. So I suspect that this is the initial salvo for the Trump administration that is meant to be taken as a warning that more severe military action could be coming as well if they don't cease and desist immediately. And by that I also mean against Israeli ships. There is no justification for sanctioning Israeli ships heading up to Eilat. And I just can't believe it.
They have enough problems to deal with of their own and still are focusing on Israel.
And for a time, the Houthis were seen as, a proxy of Iran, which they kind of are and kind of aren't. They are.
They're trying to position themselves also as the strongest one now.
The only one standing, or to a degree, well, except for Hamas, very tragically,
except for Hezbollah
is
still stands,
standing.
huh? Let's not forget that.
At different levels, and sadly, if Israel's own doing, which I hope we have time to get into. But the Houthis, I think, are in a position where their bluff can maybe be called very soon, because Iran may no longer be in a mindset to be seen as fomenting something very bad for the global economy with impunity.
All right, and now that you've talked about Iran, it says that it hopes that U.S. President Donald Trump will agree to a new nuclear deal. Iran's Vice President for Strategic Affairs, Mohammad Javad Zarif, spoke to world leaders at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. And his message, though, clashed with a warning from the IAEA, that's the UN's nuclear watchdog, which said that Tehran is, quote, pressing the gas pedal in enriching uranium to near weapons grade. Now, Trump pulled out of the first nuclear deal with Iran in 2018 and instead began a maximum pressure campaign against the Islamic Republic, including heavy sanctions on the regime. Iran denies that it wants nuclear weapons at all. Let's take a listen.
Well, had we wanted to build a nuclear weapon, we could have done it a long time ago. But a program to build nuclear weapons is not going to be like our program. You build nuclear weapons in hidden laboratories that are not subject to international inspections. By the way, Iran is not a security threat.
Joining me now is Jason Bronsky, Policy Director of United Against Nuclear Iran. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Jason. Zarif saying that Iran doesn't want nuclear weapons. Now, he also said yesterday that Iran has gained much more nuclear capability since Trump left the nuclear deal. How do those two statements make sense together?
It's great to be with you. I think it's deeply unfortunate that the World Economic Forum at Davos continues to host Iranian officials who use the platform to spew lies and disinformation, and it displays a real contempt for the audience there. And I really think that to begin deplatforming some of these officials because they're just contributing to malign information operations, which is seeking to shape world perceptions of the Islamic Republic, which are not based in reality. Javad Zarif is a chief propagandist for the Iranian regime, and I think it's deeply unfortunate that CNN allowed him to be on there, was not fact-checking him, was not cross-examining him on some of the outrageously false insinuations that he was making during the program, and also just not continuing to platform Iranian officials with with regularity that is not constructive to global discourse.
Right, but also not giving world leaders and top officials a place to speak and censoring them instead is also dangerous for the international arena for freedom of expression, for journalism. Perhaps fact-checking is a way to do it, but it's something that we've seen repeatedly with world leaders around the world. They can't just choose to not let Iranians speak.
Yes, they can. They can invite whomever they'd like to. There was no Russian official who was invited to the World Economic Forum at Davos this year to speak. Why should an Islamic Republic official be allowed to speak after Iran is arming Russia in Ukraine? So why is Russia being given a disparate treatment from the Islamic Republic?
All right. Trump is reportedly planning to name his Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, as the guy to lead the efforts on Iran. What does that tell us about the direction of the administration towards Iran?
Well, Steve Witkoff is unlike really any other Iran envoy that past administrations have put before the Iranians. The Iranians are not used to dealing with someone like him. The Iranians in the past have dealt with the same cast of characters in slightly different positions across administrations. But Steve Witkoff comes from a very different background, from the New York real estate world. And he is very adept, it seems, at hardball negotiating tactics, and also appreciates the necessity of leverage and threats as a part of negotiations. And that's something that was missing in past rounds of negotiations. Steve Witkoff is not Wendy Sherman. He's not Rob Malley. And I think some people need to slow down with snap judgments about how Steve would operate with the Iranians and how the administration is going to operate with Iran. They've only been in office since Monday. And it's important to let the full team take their space and to really see how it's going to work. But pressure and diplomacy are not incompatible with one another. As long as the administration keeps the foot on the gas and does not take the foot off the gas with the Iranians, they can speak to them for however long they want. I'm deeply skeptical we will ever come to some kind of durable diplomatic understanding with Iran as long as it's the Islamic Republic.
All right, I want to bring into the conversation Dan Perry here. You had a question to our guest.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said about Zarif and Davos, by the way. Although there are ways to do it to create a debate, but certainly not to give him the platform. My question to you is whether you would favor, and do you believe it is conceivable, for the U.S. in the context of Witkoff's efforts to categorically, whether publicly or privately, threaten military action?
Yes, I think that they should. I think President Trump was very effective in doing so in the hostage negotiations. And by the way, Steve Witkoff very publicly was repeating that threat from the president. So that is something that I would hope and really expect him to be relaying to the Iranians. I think the president should be out front threatening that, and I think Steve Witkoff should be reinforcing that. And that would actually help in his dealings with the Iranians, not hinder it.
I couldn't agree more.
All right, Jason Brodsky and Dan Perry, thank you both for joining us this evening and for your analysis and input. We really appreciate it. Now, ISIS says it killed a Chinese citizen in Afghanistan's northern Takhar province after targeting his vehicle. The Chinese national was reportedly associated with a mining company, and the Afghan local police has launched a preliminary investigation. Now, since the Taliban returned to power in Afghanistan in 2021, the Islamic State's group's regional affiliate, the Islamic State Khorasan province, has grown in strength and in danger. And Italy has arrested and then released a Libyan general. All right, we are going now to one of our guests, Yavid Faisal. He's joining me from former spokesperson for the Afghanistan Security Council. I apologize. I thought we were moving on to the next story. I appreciate you joining us here this evening and trying to break down what this actually means. First of all, how much do we know about the Chinese citizen and about this attack and China's response so far?
Well, good to be here with you this evening. The first thing is that Chinese citizens have flooded Afghanistan. From the time the U.S. left Afghanistan, the Chinese have flooded Afghanistan. That's one thing to say. So it could be an engineer, it could be a merchant. So there are several titles that the Chinese citizens in Afghanistan have. But the main issue is the threat that's not only for the Chinese citizens, but for Afghanistan and the region. It's the terrorist groups. The Taliban are lacking the integrity, the will, and the power to protect Afghanistan and the region from these groups. That's the main question. And I think they have not been accepting the facts, the truth, that they have been failing to protect the Afghan people, but in the same time to avoid Afghanistan from turning into a safe haven for international groups.
Now, I want to bring in another story from Afghanistan today. The ICC has announced that it is seeking arrest warrants for Taliban leaders for gender-based crimes as the Afghan leadership continues to crack down on women's rights in the country. Could something like this arrest warrant from the ICC make any difference, have any influence on the situation for women in Afghanistan?
We could definitely see this as a progress, a step forward, but that's not what the Taliban would actually be worried about. They don't care about international law, the organizations, the stuff. So I think there are other measures that the international community, countries led by the US, could take. And they know what they have to do, how to pressure the Taliban. International organizations may not be something the Taliban will be very much worried about.
So what is it that they are worried about? Is it the increasing presence of the regional ISIS affiliate, the ISIS group? What is the main issue for the Taliban right now?
Well, sanctions could do it. They should not be allowed to move freely. They should not be allowed to live in other countries happily with their families. Their families should not be allowed to have all the rights which they have denied to the Afghan people, to the women in Afghanistan. Their daughters go to schools outside Afghanistan, but they have not allowed the daughters of the Afghan people to go to schools within their own country. So these measures, in the same time, some other political and financial measures that could limit the Taliban. But in the same time, I think they have to pressurize the Taliban to establishing a government which could have the representation from the Afghan people.
All right, Javid Faisal, former spokesperson for the Afghanistan Security Council, thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
And now to the story from Italy. Italy arrested and then released a Libyan general accused of war crimes. Now, the Italian government is coming under fire for allowing Osama Najim, also known as al-Masri, to return home after arresting him on Sunday on a warrant issued by the International Criminal Court for alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity. Now, al-Masri is chief of Libya's judicial police and heads the Tripoli branch of the Reform and Rehabilitation Institution, which is a notorious network of detention centers. Now, Italy says he was released due to a technicality. Now, for more, we're joined by Marco Carnellos, former Italian Middle East envoy and CEO for MC Geopolicy Consulting. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. He was arrested and then sent home shortly after on a plane and reportedly received a hero's welcome at home. What do we know about al-Masri and about why he was released?
Well, what we know about al-Masri has already been said by you, and it's correct. What happened is that, first of all, this person entered in Europe, probably with a Schengen visa that was not issued by the Italian authorities. I don't know which other country issued a visa, but of course, all the other members of Schengen provided the approval for this visa. And once arrested, after the International Criminal Court had convalidated the arrest warrant that had been requested since last October by the ICC prosecutor, he was arrested on last Sunday. But the technicalities you mentioned is that in the procedure, in these cases, the Italian authorities, the police in this case, should ask the convalidation of the arrest to the Minister of Justice, that in our country has the responsibility to deal with the International Criminal Court when persons that are searched must be arrested.
Right.
Apparently, this convalidation was not provided, and so there was this technicality that allowed the Italian judge to release him, and then it start another story. That is the technical story, the judicial one. The second part of the story, why the guy was sent back to Libya and how, is more a political one.
Well, I wanted to ask you about this exactly, that increasingly when it comes to ICC warrants, it seems that it's more a political matter, really, than a legal one. It depends on the interests and the decisions of the government.
And it also depends on who is the people that is asked, which are the crimes and from which country is coming for. I don't know if you know the famous, I apologize for I use this formula, the American formula that says shit happens. And this is a typical case where, of course, there's a crisis now because the opposition in Italy is taking the opportunity to attack Giorgia Meloni government for this decision. I believe, this is my guessing, that he was quickly released and immediately sent back to Tripoli to avoid a complicated situation with Libya. The official reason is that was, let's say, a security reason because the man is under search by the International Criminal Court. I believe more that is a state reason. We, the Italian government, didn't want to compromise the relationship with the Libyan government. And this is very important for obvious reasons related to struggling against the illegal immigrations.
Right.
So in this case, Italy privileged the state reason to the important issue related to the court.
All right, Marco Carnelis, thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
And what you're hearing right now, you should be hearing it any second now, is Saudi Arabia's national anthem. I want you to take a listen for a few seconds. Now, the world-famous Hollywood super composer Hans Zimmer is supposedly working on a new interpretation of the Saudi anthem, together with a new original composition inspired by the kingdom's history called Arabia. Zimmer is known for his Oscar-winning movie theme songs, including from the Pirates of the Caribbean, Interstellar, and Gladiator. Saudi Arabia Hollywoodifying even more its national image. Now that's all for this evening's broadcast. We'll be back next week with more news and analysis from the Middle East. I'm Bianca Zanini. Enjoy your weekend.
This innovative tool is the Fat Freezer Platinum, the first home-use fat reduction device that freezes away stubborn fat.
Like most people, I always believed that diet and exercise would be enough to reduce stubborn fat.
The Fat Freezer Platinum uses technology to freeze away stubborn fat from the comfort of your own home. To optimize results, the Fat Freezer Platinum uses TheraLight. The Fat Freezer Platinum will help you sculpt your body in exactly the way you want and keep it that way. It's safe, simple to use, and bottom line is, it really works. The Fat Freezer uses a medically known technology called cryolipolysis, used in high-end clinics all across the globe.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing i24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the i24 News app today.
Israel waits. Families of hostages call on decision makers to ensure that all hostages held in terror captivity in Gaza are brought back home. Hamas is expected to free 4 female hostages on Saturday in exchange for scores of Palestinian terrorists. In the West Bank, Israel's counter-terrorism operation intensifies in Jenin, troops killing 2 Palestinian gunmen involved in the deadly terror attack in the village of Al-Funduk earlier this month, in which 3 Israelis were gunned down. And a young singer and survivor of the Nova Music Festival massacre on the 7th of October is set to represent Israel in the 2025 Eurovision Song Contest. Yuval Raphael will fly the flag high in Switzerland. This is the rundown on I24 News. I'm Benita Levine. Thank you for joining us. The Israeli cabinet is meeting at the moment, with the country facing several security threats. 475 days since the Hamas terror rampage and mass abduction in southern Israel. 4 female hostages are expected to be freed from terror captivity on Saturday, as stipulated in the ceasefire hostage deal between Israel and the terror group. 3 young women, Emily, Romy and Doron, all civilians, were freed on Sunday at the start of phase 1 of the deal. It's still not clear how many of the 94 hostages in Gaza are alive. There are also concerns that Hamas is regrouping inside the Gaza Strip. Hamas police officers have been deployed throughout the Palestinian enclave. So for the latest update, let's go live to correspondent Emily Francis. She joins us from Hostage Square in Tel Aviv. So, Emily, families of the hostages waiting for 475 days now for word on their loved ones. And now this weekend, 4 more hostages are hopefully going to be freed by Hamas. So many different emotions. What are you learning there?
Hi, good evening. Here tonight, it's actually pretty quiet. As we know, everybody is nervously anticipating Saturday, when Hamas says they're going to release the official list on Friday, and also give an update as to the status of the other 30 and their medical conditions. But again, it's pretty quiet tonight, mainly because of the weather. It was pouring earlier, and also families staying quiet as well has been the case for the other hostage release deals, even going back to the one from the 40th day, just to keep quiet, to pray, and really to avoid saying anything that could get in the way of this very fragile and delicate situation. Among the names that we've talked about as being the potential hostages to be released are the ones that were the female soldiers. So we're talking about Liri Albag, as we all know about, Karina Ariev, Agam Berger, Daniela Gilboa, and Naama Levy. Now, keep in mind, releasing 4 when we are talking now about 6 women. I know that there's one other hostage as well, is also very difficult to swallow. That means 2 are going to be left behind. Similarly, of the rest of the deal and the rest of the release, we don't know if they're going to all come back alive or if they're not. We're hearing about Shiri Bibas and her 2 children. Many people not really knowing what is going on. So it's very hard to get overly excited, while at the same time, there is hope. It's that constant push-pull that we have been experiencing times gazillion for 475 days. But let's just hope that come Saturday, we'll be here sharing another tearful, historic moment.
Here is hoping. Thank you so much, correspondent Emily Francis in Tel Aviv. And now for more, we welcome to studio Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Jonathan Conricus, the former IDF international spokesperson and a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, and our correspondent, Balich Sladin. Gentlemen, thank you both so much. So Emily, Romy and Doron have been in Israeli territory, Jonathan, for 4 nights now, sleeping in beds in the comfort, maybe a hospital, but still knowing their family and loved ones are nearby. So much hope and anticipation and dread and anxiety about this weekend. Your sense?
So a few important things are about to happen. One, the most important, is hopefully the return of 4 Israeli hostages. 2 is the provision of a list of who is alive and who is dead. And that's an important list, very important list for both for Israel and for Hamas. It will influence how Israel will calculate the next weeks coming ahead. But I think it will also give an indication to Israel and to all of the negotiators how serious Hamas is and what really are the options to go beyond the first deal and go to a second deal, which will facilitate the return of a maximum amount of 65 Israeli men that are still held in the Gaza Strip. So it's an important test to kind of test the waters and see where we're going. Also important happening as we speak is an Israeli decision, or rather the policy towards the ceasefire in Lebanon.
Right.
Maybe we will be discussing it, but crucial moments. The time is almost up, and now is decision time. Is Israel going to withdraw from southern Lebanon, knowing that the Lebanese armed forces have not been deployed, and knowing that Hezbollah is still present in some parts of the southern parts of Lebanon, mostly the eastern part? So there are 3 very important things happening.
We're going to take a deeper look at the developments across the northern front. Of course, that ceasefire supposed to end on Sunday. But going back to the hostage deal, Balich, Israel is said to be pushing for civilian hostage Arbel Yehud to be released this weekend. Conflicting reports. What are you learning? What can you tell us?
Yes, Arbel Yehud is the 4th female civilian that needs to be released this Saturday, and Israel is insisting that she would be included in the list that Israel is supposed to get tomorrow by 4 p.m. That's something that is very important because of the fact that we are talking about in total 10 women here. 5 of them are Israeli soldiers and 5 are female soldiers. 3 already are back. The other 2 are this Arbel and of course Shiri Bibas, that apparently Israel believes that she is dead or she has been killed. Now, in this case, if Israel is insisting on Arbel specifically, and we are not hearing anything from Hamas about this, we reached out to Hamas sources. They couldn't actually give us an answer about why Israel is insisting on Arbel. She is on the list. She's supposed to be released. And also the Israelis are not giving us answers about why they are insisting on her release this Saturday. She is held by, not Hamas actually, she is held in Khan Yunis by a group named the Palestinian Mujahideen Movement. This is a jihadi group, a jihadist group that is more radical, let's say, than Hamas. And maybe Israel is fearing that they won't actually let her go, won't release her, or maybe they're fearing that she or something happened to her, or she has been killed just recently. That's something that apparently is being considered, and that's why in Israel they are insisting on her release this coming Saturday. Now, this is very important also because of the list that we're talking about, of all of the rest of the hostages, in order for Israel to know who is alive and who is not. And while Israel will get that and the release of the hostages, Israel needs to facilitate the return of the Gazans also to the north of the Strip. In Israel, they are saying if Yehud is not released on Saturday, that means that Hamas are violating the agreement, and now we're not going to do our part. We're not going to let Gazans to go to the north of the Gaza Strip, and that's something, of course, that could blow up this whole agreement, and would Israel or the Israeli government at least would have an excuse here, because they will say Hamas is not living up for their promises. Then we shouldn't also do that as well. So very dramatic 48 hours are ahead of us.
Dramatic indeed, and obviously much sensitivity around those details. Speculation doesn't help either. But what we do know is that 2,400 aid trucks have entered Gaza since the ceasefire. Some of the aid has been, quote unquote, diverted by Hamas. Others might describe it as stealing, hijacking. Your sense of what it means if there is a violation around the deal, how does that impact this aid that is now flowing into the Palestinian enclave?
So I think that the aid, many times misnamed humanitarian aid, but the goods coming into the Gaza Strip, they really are the center of gravity and the source of force for Hamas to remain in power. In lieu of anything else, this is what Hamas uses in order to recruit, maintain control, and in order to have leverage on the civilian population. Many discussions have been made inside Israel before the hostage deal was implemented, the ceasefire was implemented, about actually taking control over this process and denying Hamas the ability to do exactly what we're seeing, to take control of the goods coming in and selling it or using it for political purposes. So I think this is really what it's about. This is the future. When Israel will decide, I think it's a when and not an if, when Israel will decide that Israel is going to take control over the distribution of food, that will be the time when Hamas will be in real trouble. That is, of course, not something that's going to happen now while we are under a ceasefire and while there's a deal going on and while there's the option of getting hostages back. But as mentioned here before, each side will be looking for quote-unquote excuses. One issue that I think is really important going forward is the mechanism by which food is distributed in Gaza. As long as it stays in the hands of Hamas, Hamas remains in power. The moment it is taken from Hamas, then that will be the beginning of the end of their rule over Gaza.
Many questions remain about what will happen down the line, of course. Gentlemen, stay with us. As we discussed earlier, there's another ceasefire to contemplate. Israel has reportedly asked the US for an additional 30 days to complete the withdrawal of its troops from southern Lebanon, the request coming days ahead of the 60-day deadline stipulated in the ceasefire agreement with Hezbollah. In terms of the truce, the IDF is required to cede all of its positions in southern Lebanon to the Lebanese armed forces by this Sunday. In recent weeks, however, Israel has assessed that the Lebanese forces have deployed too slowly, delaying the IDF's withdrawal. Israeli media is reporting that the US and France are discussing the request for an extension with Israeli and Lebanese officials. It's believed, though, the new US administration wants the full withdrawal wrapped up by this Sunday. Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Jonathan Conricus, and correspondent Balir Slatin are still in studio. Hezbollah saying just a short while ago it would not accept any extension to the deal and that Israeli troops need to withdraw from southern Lebanon. This happening just a short while ago. Jonathan, your take on what this means?
Well, it's to be expected that Hezbollah would, of course, oppose it, but what we need to be listening to is the volume or the intensity of their opposition to it. Hezbollah really isn't in any position to be dictating terms. They were beaten severely during the war. They've lost domestic clout and they have lost international clout. And most importantly, they do not currently have a way of resupplying themselves because of what happened in Syria and because of the fact that the Iranian regime can no longer use Syria as a way to supply Hezbollah. So they're not really in a position to be dictating terms, and as such, I think that they will calibrate their response accordingly. My assessment is that that Israel made sure to have a tacit approval of the US before making the request, and a backdoor understanding, indirect understanding with the Lebanese that yes, they really haven't deployed, which is correct on the ground. The Lebanese armed forces have not deployed and they have not implemented the agreement. And as such, it is still tactically impossible for Israel to withdraw, and it would expose Israeli civilians to virtually having Hezbollah on the border again. So I think what we're going to see, my careful assessment is that this will be allowed by the powers that govern this agreement, by the Americans and with tacit approval of the French, and we will see an extension and not a return to fighting. I don't think that anybody, world, local, Lebanese, Israeli, wants focus to be diverted to igniting that front again. And I think 30 more days of stability. Hopefully the Lebanese armed forces will deploy, and hopefully at the end of that time, Israel will be able to withdraw and focus on Gaza, Judea and Samaria, and many other things that Israel has to do.
Because, of course, one of the many goals of this war is for the tens of thousands of evacuated residents of the north of Israel who have been out of their homes since shortly after the 7th of October will be able to go safely back home. But that's a long way off, Balir.
Yeah, this is very tricky, I guess, because on one hand, yes, Israel needs to withdraw completely from Lebanon by the end of this 60 days period. But on the other hand, they cannot maybe guarantee for the Israelis that reside in the north of Israel to go back to their homes. Maybe they will not be convinced, and it needs to give them guarantees that they are safe. That's something that Israel needs to work around it. Now, the cabinet meeting today is discussing exactly that.
Right.
And we know, according to reports from Al-Akhbar newspaper that is actually close to Hezbollah, that Israel reportedly wanted to stay in 3 hills in the south of Lebanon, in the front, in the eastern front, the western front, and also in the center. And in Hezbollah's statement, and I agree with the gentleman over here, they were not very harsh. And not only that, they actually said that it will open a new chapter if Israel stays over the 60 days period, but they threw the responsibility over for the Lebanese government, for the political level in Lebanon, and they said that they need to pressure the mediators, that the mediators would pressure Israel to withdraw completely from Lebanon. So if Israel wants to stay, it needs to take the concession from 2 parties here. One, the Trump administration, that until now, from what I understand, they want Israel to withdraw completely by Sunday, and also from the Lebanese government. Otherwise, Hezbollah will have the excuse, and Hezbollah will also be able to tell the other rivals inside Lebanon, the domestic rivalry there, that we told you so. It's not because we started this war on October 8th. They want to attack us anyway, and they want to settle in the south of Lebanon, and that's why we told you so. That's something that Israel cannot let itself happening after the victory, after the progress that has been made in Lebanon.
The ceasefire ends on Sunday. We wait to see if it will, in fact, be extended. Gentlemen, stay with us. Much more to discuss, because Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is planning to invest $600 billion in the US during Donald Trump's second term as president. So what does this mean for future relations between Riyadh and Washington, and possible future ties with Jerusalem? More in this report.
In an indication of President Donald Trump's priorities for his second term in office, his first foreign phone call was made to Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, an indication of his desire to expand the Abraham Accords with a normalization agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia. The deal would likely be part of a defense agreement that Riyadh is looking to sign with Washington, which would provide Saudi Arabia with security guarantees from the US and also lead to investments into the American economy. But the Saudis have long made clear that such a deal would require the establishment of a pathway to the eventual establishment of a Palestinian state, only intensifying that rhetoric since October 7th, making clear that an end to the war in Gaza is necessary before normalization talks can proceed. Similarly, the UAE, which Israel has sought to recruit to play a role in the post-war management of Gaza, has also stressed the establishment of a reformed Palestinian Authority as part of that process. Also Wednesday, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu held his first phone call with Marco Rubio since the latter became America's top diplomat. A readout from the State Department said that Rubio underscored that maintaining the United States' steadfast support for Israel is a top priority for U.S. President Donald Trump. Rubio also emphasized the importance of furthering discussions regarding post-conflict planning for the governance and security of Gaza for the longer term. However, a two-state solution has been categorically and repeatedly rejected by Netanyahu, who has stated that Israel will continue to oppose unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state.
Meanwhile, President Donald Trump has redesignated the Houthis in Yemen as a foreign terrorist organization. The move introduces harsher economic penalties on the Iranian-backed group and its sponsors in response to the Houthis' repeated attacks on commercial shipping in the Red Sea and on U.S. warships. More in this report by our Yulia Popogailova.
U.S. President Donald Trump has redesignated Yemen's Houthi movement, known formally as Ansar Allah, as a foreign terrorist organization. The move means the Houthis will face increased sanctions, cutting them off from international financial systems and resources. It also allows the U.S. to target individuals and entities supporting the group, which Washington blames for destabilizing the Middle East. Joe Biden lifted the terror designation in 2021, concerned about the ability of the UN and other humanitarian organizations to deliver aid to civilians in Yemen. But since November 2023, the Houthis have carried out over 100 attacks on ships in the Red Sea, sinking 2 vessels and killing at least 4 seafarers. These actions, they claim, were in solidarity with Palestinians amid Israel's war against Hamas.
The actions that we've seen from these Houthi forces are destabilizing, they're dangerous, and clearly a flagrant violation of international law. And so this is an international problem that requires an international solution.
The Houthis have signaled a reduction in their Red Sea operations after a ceasefire in Gaza came into effect on January 16th. On Wednesday, the Houthis released the crew of the commercial vessel Galaxy Leader more than a year after seizing it.
We emphasize that this release was coordinated with our brothers, the fighters in Gaza. Yemen had earlier declared that these people were under the disposal of our brothers in Gaza, and their release was based on this coordination and communication.
However, the Houthis continue to hold dozens of UN staff, as well as scores of NGO workers and other civilians. The Trump administration says its designation as a terror group sends a clear message that the Houthis' actions will not be tolerated.
Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Jonathan Conricus. So President Donald Trump is back in the Oval Office. He chooses his first phone call to a world leader to be to Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. We've discussed relations between Riyadh and Washington and Jerusalem. What do you make of this call? What do you make of the strategy and what it means for relations down the line between Israel and Saudi Arabia?
Well, you remember we had a conversation a few days ago, last week, about the deal, about the terms of the deal between Israel and Hamas, where I said that I hope that there are additional understandings between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu that will be beneficial for Israel. Because if there aren't, it is a very bad deal vis-a-vis Hamas. This might be just that. This might be just the future and what really could be, I think, very beneficial for the US, for Saudi, and for Israel. And in the long run, it'll probably be good for Palestinians as well, but that still remains to be seen. And bottom line, this may be what where the region is going, an American-led, prosperity-focused initiative that will bring American protection and assurances to the Saudis, which is the most important thing that they're looking for. Some kind of, as they say, pathway assurances for Palestinian statehood, which I think is flexible enough and allows Israel enough wiggle room to live with, and to end the conflict in Gaza after Hamas is taken out of the picture. That, I think, is what that call is about and what the future holds. There are still many moving parts. The Islamic Republic of Iran has a lot to say about that, and they will oppose and fight against it. There are the nuclear ambitions of the Iranians. The Houthis, which it really is quite, it defies logic that just now the US president redefined them as a terrorist organization. They are, I think, the embodiment of a terrorist organization, and the fact that they weren't defined as one really begs disbelief. But bottom line, we're, I think, looking ahead at the possible positive outcomes of the ceasefire in Israel, and hopefully that will lead to good things.
It is stunning to think that the Houthis have been launching missiles at civilian parts of Israel for so many months, and now we're hearing Donald Trump redesignates the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization. As you say, firsthand, Israelis have experienced that. But Balich, the reaction in the Arab world to the Houthis being redesignated as a terrorist group, what is that going to look like?
Well, it's not the first time. They have been designated as a terrorist organization also during the previous Trump term, and then Biden removed them from that list, and now Trump at the first day doing exactly the opposite, bringing them back to that same list. I think they don't care. That's exactly the reaction from the Arab world, if you want to hear it in one word, and it's because we're talking about a country that is the least, or in the bottom of the list of the countries by GDP per capita in the whole of the Middle East. We're talking about people that live just day by day. Their only ambition, or most of the ambition, is to fight the Americans, to fight the Israelis, and that's exactly what they are doing in the part, at least, that is governed by the Houthis. Now, this will not change a thing in regards of the ceasefire agreement and whether the Houthis will resume the attacks on Israel if Israel resumes fighting in the Gaza Strip. But I think that the statement by the Houthis back in Sunday, I guess, that said that we will stop attacking the other vessels that belong to the US and to the Brits, also in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, that means that the Houthis also wants to take a right step, maybe, with this new administration. But the question that needs to be asked, what will happen if the Houthis resume the attacks on Israel? And Trump, in his mind, that needs to always keep this image of the victorious, of the strong man in America, and the person that needs to lead the world with strength and peace through strength. Will he attack the Houthis and maybe escalate and maybe lead to a war with the Houthis, something that he said that I don't want to do? Or will he do exactly what he did back in 2018 when the Houthis attacked the Saudis and even downed an American drone, and he did nothing? And he said that it's not costly enough for me to open a new war in the Middle East.
We certainly wait to see exactly how it all unfolds, and of course what Donald Trump's response may be in the event that you are outlining. Gentlemen, stay with us because we're taking a very quick break. But when we get back, our coverage continues on The Rundown. We speak to a woman whose boyfriend made the ultimate sacrifice at the Nova Music Festival on the 7th of October, saving many lives. You don't want to miss this story. Stay tuned to The Rundown.
You live in Israel or you are preparing for your Aliyah? Congratulations. You have a smartphone? Perfect. Download the Olim app for free and discover everything we have to offer. Booking medical and administrative appointments, bills paying, debt verification, instant translation, contractor recommendation, request tracking, and much more. And if you can't manage it on your own, our team speaks your language and assists you with all your procedures in Israel, starting from 199 shekels per month, unlimited and for the whole family. Don't hesitate any longer. Download the app or contact us.
Bad posture. The ever-increasing hours we spend sitting, working, and even while trying to relax at home is twisting our vertebrae out of alignment and creating strain and pain on muscles, ligaments, and joints. A scientifically designed spine and back support device that uses precision biometric technology to perfectly align the back and spine for all-day comfort and support, creating perfect posture for your back every time you sit down. Now features extra-wide acupressure comfort pads as well as an extended height back panel for even more support, making it perfect for all body types. Also features a precision wing design that perfectly cradles your back and spine with amazing ergonomic support that leaves you feeling refreshed and energized even after sitting all day.
The 7th of October set in motion a chain of events.
Today, Israel's enemies are severely weakened, but not defeated, and the balance of power is shifting. This region never rests. And for its own survival, Israel needs to keep its finger on the pulse. If you want to better understand, if you want to hear voices you won't hear elsewhere, then tune in daily to Middle East Now on i24 News.
Welcome back to The Rundown. It's a story of the ultimate sacrifice, all unfolding at the Nova Music Festival on the 7th of October. It's the story of a true hero. Ben Shimoni saved many lives during the Hamas terror rampage, going back 3 times to help extract people before he was murdered by terrorists. The 31-year-old Israeli had spoken on the phone to his girlfriend during the carnage, telling her he was going to drive back to save more people. And one of those people in his car was Romi Gonen, who was later taken hostage. And she, of course, was freed from terror captivity on Sunday after 471 days in terror captivity in Gaza. And so now we welcome Jessica Elter, the girlfriend of Ben Shimoni. Jessica, thank you so much for being here, and condolences. Of course, Ben was a true hero, the ultimate sacrifice indeed. Before we get to the 7th of October, describe for us how it felt for you when you saw Romi Gonen coming out of captivity, reunited with her mom and her family.
Wow, I had no words then, and I have no words now. I still can't believe that she's here, she's with us. I was waiting for this moment the whole year. I believe all Israel was waiting for those moments for people to coming back. But for me, it was, I waited for my story to be closed, to get a close-up. And I don't think I will get it, because Ben will never come back. But at least I know that his mission was completed, because he started to save those people in the car, and the last one was Romi. And now I can say he succeeded. Now I can say that Ben saved 13 people, that he did whatever he could have done to save as much as he could.
It's just so heart-wrenching to think what he went through, but what has happened. As you say, Romi is home, Romi is with her family. If you can, take us back to the 7th. You were on the phone with Ben. What are your recollections now?
We were on the phone the whole morning. I was supposed to be with him at the party, and I decided to stay home. And I was with him the whole morning. He was saving people. He was telling me what he's doing, what's going on there. And on the last rescue that Romi was in the car, I heard suddenly Ben saying the word terrorists. And I heard the girls screaming, and it was Romi Gonen screaming and Gaia Khalifa that got murdered in this car. And suddenly I heard guns and screaming and shootings and quiet. And today I know to say that this quiet was Ben's death. They murdered Ben while I was with him on the phone. And they murdered Gaia as well. And they shot Romi. And they shot Ofir Tsarfati, that was in the car as well. And then after they murdered them both, they kidnapped Ofir and Romi to Gaza. And they brought back Ofir as a body after a while. And Romi is the last survivor from this car. She's the only one that can tell us what really happened in that moment. I can see the video of Romi with her family, and I still can't believe that she's with us, that she's here.
Ben had a choice. He could have driven back home, and he chose to go back and save strangers. How does that feel? How does that make you feel right now?
I had a lot of feeling about this the whole year. First of all, this is very Ben. And I really know that if Ben would have been saved this time, he would have gone again. Until there were no Nova parties there, and all the people are in their houses. Because if not, he wouldn't be able to sit in our house while people are getting murdered outside. This is not him. So I wasn't shocked when this happened. Of course, I was mad at him. If I will say I wasn't mad at him, I will be lying, because he was a person that always thought about other people before he thought about himself. Like this morning. I wanted him to be here with us, that he would have sat here and tell his story, not me, because he's the real hero of this story. And one of the important things that the reason that I'm still saying his story and coming to the places to speak it is because he's not able to do it. And his voice needs to be heard, but he's not able to speak his own voice. So I feel like this is my mission now, to speak his voice. Like, he started the mission and I need to finish his mission.
He is an angel, no doubt about it, a hero, no doubt about it. What is your sense? People were at a music festival. They were literally dancing and celebrating peace. And here we sit at this heartbreaking and heart-wrenching moment in the country, hoping and waiting for news that more hostages will in fact be freed, like Romy. What is your sense about the future as a young person living here, given what you've been through?
I feel like we lost all the confidence in the country of just walking here in the street 2 days ago. A lot of terrorists are here walking between of us. I don't feel safe. That's what I can say. I don't feel safe today. And I hope that there will be change after all the people will come back from Gaza, our people, the hostages. And I hope something needs to change here. Something must change here. And I don't feel safe. That's what I can say today. I don't feel safe to go to parties without watching always behind me if someone's coming. I don't feel safe even walking in the street here. And I hope that will change. I hope someone will do something that will change, because it can't keep going. Those are angels that just wanted to dance. Like all of us. It's going to be me, it's going to be you, it's going to be them, it's going to be any one of us. It's going to be anyone that's watching now TV. So I think we all need to gather around together and to be united from all over the world. We want peace eventually. We want to be safe. What do we want in this life?
Peace, and people want to be safe. It's a basic need. Jessica Elter, may Ben's memory be a blessing. Thank you so much for having the courage to speak to us. Thank you very much for being with us here on the Rundown. Thank you. Now, talking of freed hostages, when Emily Damari was freed from terror captivity on Sunday with Romy, she came out with a bandaged hand. The young Israeli-British woman had been shot and wounded during the Hamas terror assault on the 7th of October, losing 2 fingers. Now, the image of her hand has inspired people the world over, and tattoo artists here in Israel have been busy. Yuli Salomon from our sister Hebrew channel explains why.
January 19th was a historic day for Israelis. Tens of thousands have expressed their feelings on social media, embracing Doron Steinbrecher, Romy Gonen, and Emily Damari with love and support after their release from Hamas captivity. Some decided they wanted to immortalize the gesture Emily made upon her return. Her wounded fist, raised in a victory gesture despite 2 missing fingers, has inspired many.
It's a sign of love and a reminder that we should learn to love one another without hatred.
We were watching the moments of freedom while working, and later that night, I saw the photo of her gesture circulating online. As soon as I saw it, I realized it was iconic. As a tattoo artist, I immediately saw it as a stencil. It was perfect. Then I noticed an emoji had been made of it, and I thought, this combination is incredible. I knew I needed it. The next morning, I turned to Eden, our tattooist.
It's incredibly moving to create this tattoo. It represents so much: emotion, significance, resilience, and heroism. To me, it's a way to commemorate something meaningful to all of us.
This gesture also means "I love you" in sign language, which only adds to its iconic status. But more than that, it symbolizes willpower, determination, and positive energy. That's its true meaning.
This hand gesture, combined with Emily's radiant smile, has gone viral worldwide.
My brother's wife lost her cousin Yossi Avrahami in the Ramallah lynching in October 2000. We currently live in New York, and over the past year, we've noticed many artists wearing pins with the bloodied hands from that lynching. When I saw Emily, when she was still in the helicopter, make this gesture, I thought, this is our response to the bloodied hand symbol. For me, it represents the Israeli spirit, victory, resilience, and steadfastness. It was very important for me to get this tattoo here in Israel before returning to New York.
It feels something else to be here, like in this week, with how emotional everything is, and you don't have to worry about it. Like, we know when we come here, we're with somebody who's with us.
Emily's gesture has become a symbol of the strength and resilience of a young Israeli who never broke, even in the darkest place on earth. It will serve as a source of hope and strength, especially for the hostages who are still waiting to return home.
Meet Yuval Raphael. The young singer and survivor of the Nova massacre on the 7th of October is set to represent Israel in the 2025 Eurovision Song Contest. The 24-year-old performer from Renana won the Rising Star contest on Channel 12 with her renditions of ABBA's Dancing Queen and Sam Smith's Writings on the Wall. She says she is so grateful for the privilege to represent her people. The Eurovision Song Contest will take place in Switzerland on the 17th of May. Now, the song she will sing will be selected by a professional committee. In March, Yuval joined the Jerusalem Institute of Justice at the UN in Geneva to testify about the trauma as she and 50 people hid in a public bomb shelter just outside of Kibbutz Be'eri. She described how she was trapped under the body of another young woman for 8 hours, and she pretended to be dead. Of the 50 people who hid with her, only 12 survived long enough to be rescued. Back to developments on the ground. The Israeli counter-terrorism operation in Jenin in the West Bank continues for a third day. The IDF, Shin Bet and border guards targeting terrorists and terror sites overnight. Troops killed 2 Palestinian gunmen. They had been involved in the deadly terror shooting attack in the village of Al Funduk earlier this month. Hamas had claimed responsibility for that attack in which 3 Israelis were gunned down. Still in studio, Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Jonathan Conricus, and our correspondent, Balir Sladin. A volatile situation, many developments, Palestinian security forces, Israeli forces. Is there coordination? Jonathan, what do we know about what is happening there?
Well, this reminds me of the operation that Israel conducted in Tulkarem about half a year ago. Similar scope, similar size, I think similar objectives. I would call it mowing the lawn plus. Not necessarily, really breaking the back of Palestinian terrorist organizations in Jenin, but really doing a more concentrated effort in Jenin. Important to note that Israel isn't deploying really heavy armor or heavier equipment. It is relatively light. It is not the type of equipment that we have in Gaza. So I think that the scope and the severity of the operation is different. The Palestinian Authority probably wouldn't want us to say, but it is at least coordinated and there's basic deconfliction on the ground so that Israeli troops don't find themselves facing Palestinian security forces. And it, of course, comes after the PA started an operation, which they then ended with an agreement with the local gangs and organizations in Jenin and stop that operation. And Israel still needs to go in and attack the battalion, so-called Jenin battalion. It's about 150, 200 operatives. I think this can go on and it can spread to other cities. There's strong infrastructure in Tulkarem, in, of course, Nablus, in Jericho. There's massive Hamas infrastructure in Hebron. I don't think that is really on the line yet, because that would mean a big operation for Israel to deal with Hamas in Hebron. But this is local, responding to pressing needs. I suspect there's also a bit of politics involved, Israeli coalition politics as part of the considerations, but nevertheless, there's imminent threats coming out of Jenin, which Israeli security forces are now dealing with.
And also reports that Palestinian Authority security forces have been arresting gunmen fleeing from the Jenin camp. Alech, what update can you share? What is happening in recent hours right there?
Yes, local reports are pointing exactly at this thing, the coordination between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. Many pictures are circulating online of a handshake, so-called handshake, between the Palestinian Authority policemen and the IDF, because of the fact that the IDF is surrounding Jenin, of course, trying to deal and arrest the gunmen inside Jenin. But it happened before that when that happens, they manage to flee outside of Jenin, and that's exactly what was the tactic before. And immediately after the IDF withdrawals or pulls back out of Jenin, they come back to their positions inside the camp or inside the city of Jenin itself. Now, from what I understand, anyone who could or was able to flee from the Jenin camp was arrested by the PA. I've seen videos and also pictures of at least 10 that were arrested by the Palestinian Authority, and that's why the debate right now, or the criticism, let's call it, against the Palestinian Authority inside the West Bank is increasing, because of the fact that they are coordinating in some way or another with the Israeli forces on the ground. Now, this is happening after some red flags, indeed, that were raised recently. Just yesterday, an explosive drone was found near the settlement of Yitzhar in the West Bank, and also the planted explosives that we see everywhere around Jenin, and even rockets that we've seen videos of, although that not as strong as the rockets that Hamas uses, but at least that's a red flag for the Israeli side, and that's why we are seeing this operation right now.
A volatile situation indeed, very concerning. Correspondent Balek Sladen and Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Jonathan Conricus, appreciate you both being here in studio. Thank you so much. Now, further afield, the latest out of the United States. Donald Trump moving quickly, the president getting straight to business in the Oval Office. So for more, let's cross to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim. He joins us from Washington. So President Donald Trump has made many appointments, Mike, that have raised eyebrows. The choice, though, of Michael Domino as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East is causing much concern, especially among those who are worried about the threat that Iran poses and some of his views on threats in the region. Tell us more. What is the latest there?
Yeah, this name we're going to be hearing more and more about. Michael Domino, former CIA military analyst. He's also worked at an isolationist think tank, and he's not advocating, according to his policy papers and podcast interviews and such, not advocating for some kind of course correction in the Middle East. He's advocating essentially for a work from home format. Leave the Middle East alone. There's no U.S. interest there. There's nothing vital there. We don't need to be there. In fact, anything we do there doesn't turn out well for the U.S. So let's get the heck out of there and run away as soon as possible. Let Israel fend for itself. Let the Kurds fend for themselves. Iran's really not that much of a problem. The rest of the world will figure it out. It seems like I'm exaggerating here, but if you look at his actual positions, that's in fact what he's advocating for. So yes, certainly eyebrows being raised among Israel supporters, and I'm sure the Israeli government itself looking at this and saying, what in the world is going on here? Domino will head up, apparently, the Middle East policy at the State Department. This is the position that's been held until recent days by Dan Shapiro, the ex-ambassador from the U.S. to Israel, who was largely, though he did have his own criticisms of the Israeli government, largely a supporter of Israel. This is just going completely in a 180-degree direction. Now, keep in mind, Pete Hegseth is expected to be confirmed within the next 24 to 48 hours as Defense Secretary. I don't think there are many more pro-Israel people in that role that you could find outside of Hegseth. So it really is going to be interesting here, assuming that that nomination goes through the Senate. Who wins the kind of tug of war here? And I think more of the question is, How in the world did Mike Domino wind up getting appointed to that particular position? It seems, according to some reports, that the hiring folks right now and those selecting candidates for those particular roles in the Defense Department are on the isolationist wing of the party to begin with.
Curious indeed. Live from Washington, senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim, thank you as always. Meanwhile, Benjamin Netanyahu has issued a message of support for Elon Musk after the tech billionaire sparked much outrage by making a salute from the podium at an official rally to celebrate the presidential inauguration on Monday. Many slamming what they say looked like a Nazi salute, the Anti-Defamation League calling the incident an awkward gesture. The Israeli Prime Minister taking to the X social media platform to say Elon is a great friend of Israel. He visited after the October 7th massacre and has since repeatedly and forcefully supported Israel's right to defend itself against genocidal terrorists and regimes who seek to annihilate the one and only Jewish state, adding he thanks him for this. Musk responding to the Prime Minister's post, thanking him too. Changing gears completely now. Archaeological studies over the years have suggested that ancient copper mining has contributed to pollution and global warming. Now there's a new study. Let's take a look.
We know global warming, pollution, and unfathomable natural disasters are a reality that all of humanity has to grapple with. But whose fault is it really?
We know about the modern time, our era, that we are harming the environment. The modern metal industry is very detrimental. It's horrible. And also talking about climate change. It's something that is anthropogenic, based on our activity, and it's real.
Scholars, archaeologists, and researchers over the years have blamed humans from ancient times.
There was a publication a few years ago about the legacy, the polluted legacy of King Solomon and all of the disastrous activities. But there is some projection of the reality of the modern time into the past, saying that humans, starting probably from the agricultural revolution, this is when we started impacting in a very harmful way the entire environment. But we have to be very careful not to throw out the baby with the bathwater here.
And archaeologist and Tel Aviv University professor Erez Ben Yosef has been leading digs for 15 years in Timna in southern Israel. Visiting Timna is like going back in time, literally.
Timna it's an amazing place to study ancient metal production. It's one of the best preserved places of ancient metal production anywhere that represents 7,000 years of history of metal production. And we worked there to study the ancient technology and the ancient cultures and people that were working there through the ages, including during the biblical time.
Copper mines churned out antiquity's most revolutionary discovery, one that dates back to the 6th millennium BC during the Neolithic times, and literally changed the ancient world.
It was a major discovery, you know.
It's like electricity.
So, yeah, like electricity in the modern era. It's like to take a stone and to make it into a different material, which you can then melt and produce tools, weapons, agricultural tools, ornaments. It was an amazing change in technology.
And the proof is in the pudding.
We have good evidence, radiocarbon dates and other evidence that this was indeed the source of wealth of the early Israelites, the copper mines of Timna. Now a lot of these narratives in the Bible make sense.
In early 2023, we visited Professor Ben Yosef and his team as they were doing an important dig, trying to get to the bottom of a mystery. Did ancient copper mining pollute the planet and poison human beings?
When you produce copper, there is of course residues of copper left and also lead. And lead is actually very poisonous, we know. So I was worried that maybe we are getting poisoned by the lead in the soil. What we did basically is a detailed soil survey with studying the chemistry of the soil and mapping the distribution of all the different elements in two different sites from two different periods. One of them is from the Bronze Age, about 5,000 years ago, and the other one is from the Iron Age. 3,000 years ago, this is actually King Solomon's mines.
The 15,000-acre national park is dotted with evidence in the rocks themselves. However, these black stones are actually filled with ancient residue called slag.
When you smelt copper, go back to this amazing industry in the past, you need heat, and they had furnaces that looked like small volcanoes. And at the end, there was a lot of kind of lava, molten rock flowing out of the furnace, and this consolidated into a black rock-like material which is called slag, and this is the vast majority of the waste we see all around us.
So by analyzing what has always been encapsulated inside Israel's largest national park, Professor Ben Yosef and his team were able to prove that not only were they not poisoned, but neither is the rest of the planet.
The most harmful impact of ancient metal industries or modern metal industries are the gases that are emitted from the furnaces and the byproduct, and these gases you can breathe it, or it goes to the soil. Or the copper we measure in the soil is trapped within tiny fragments of this slag material, meaning that if you swallow it, it most probably won't affect you at all.
Ben Yosef says it's also a lesson in semantics, extinguishing the sexy headlines claiming ancient pollution with hard evidence.
Our responsibility.
And that is a wrap for the rundown for today. I24 News will have special coverage in English on Saturday on the expected hostage release. I'm Benita Levine. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned.
You live in Israel or you are preparing for your Aliyah? Congratulations. You have a smartphone? Perfect. Download the Olim app for free and discover everything we have to offer. Booking medical and administrative appointments, bills paying, debt verification, instant translation, contractor recommendation, request tracking, and much more. And if you can't manage it on your own, our team speaks your language and assists you with all your procedures in Israel, starting from 199 shekels per month, unlimited and for the whole family. Don't hesitate any longer. Download the app or contact us.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
The 7th of October set in motion a chain of events. Today, Israel's enemies are severely weakened, but not defeated, and the balance of power is shifting. This region never rests. And for its own survival, Israel needs to keep its finger on the pulse. If you want to better understand, if you want to hear voices you won't hear elsewhere, then tune in daily to Middle East Now on I24 News.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Hello and welcome to Jewish World Weekly on I-24 News. I'm Emily Francis. Each week we focus on stories, issues, and personalities of Jewish interest here in Israel and throughout the diaspora, the global Jewish community. And we start with our top 5 items in the Jewish world, presented by Nicole Zedek. Nicole.
Thanks, Emily. Here are the top 5 items in the Jewish world this week. A lawsuit in D.C. was filed against Joe Biden's administration for a, quote, unconstitutional sanctioning of American-Israeli settlers. Levi Yitzhak Pilant and Issachar Man had their assets frozen after the Biden administration accused them of undermining peace, security, and stability in the West Bank, including leading settler attacks on Palestinians. The lawsuit claims they are being targeted for being Jews who are living on Jewish land. A Columbia University professor claims she was fired due to her pro-Palestinian views. Law professor Catherine Frank was found by an internal investigation to have incited discrimination against Israeli students who were suspended during the pro-Palestinian campus protests back in May. The university confirmed that Frank had, quote, accelerated her planned retirement. A pro-Palestinian rally in London is attempting to defy police restrictions by marching past a synagogue. The Metropolitan Police placed restrictions on the march, which is set to finish at the BBC headquarters, because Jewish leaders and lawmakers raised concerns about the safety of congregants. Talks with the leaders of the rally failed as they refused to change their route. One of Syria's last remaining Jews has died at the age of 92. The chief rabbinate of Syria announced that Hadia Sita passed away, leaving only 8 Jews in a country that used to have one of the largest Jewish populations in the world. May her memory be a blessing. And finally, an Israeli aid organization has called on diaspora Jews to help rebuild Israel's northern communities. The One Heart organization says, well, they've already mobilized 5,000 people to help restore the communities that were targeted and evacuated during the Israel-Hezbollah war. They are looking for 10,000 more to help the thousands of displaced Israelis return home. Now, those are your top 5 items in the Jewish world this week. Back to you, Emily.
The death toll continues to rise in the ongoing wildfires ripping through several Los Angeles neighborhoods. Authorities say dozens have been killed and many more are still missing. Despite heroic, unrelenting efforts by firefighters, heavy winds are expected, with fears mounting that the flames could once again wreak havoc in more neighborhoods. Fire authorities say over 40,000 acres have already burned in the blazes and are still not contained. The sleepy community of Pacific Palisades has been utterly destroyed by these fires, leaving thousands of families homeless, including the rabbis of Pacific Palisades Kehilloth Israel Synagogue. Joining us now from Pacific Palisades is Rabbi Amy Bernstein, the senior rabbi of Kehilloth Israel in Pacific Palisades. First of all, thank you for being here, and I'm sorry it has to be under such a dire and tragic circumstances, and I want to personally send my respect for the fact that you yourself, being the leader of a Jewish community and also being the victim of losing your own home, I cannot imagine the waves of emotions you're feeling.
Yeah, there's a lot going on, obviously, ranging from incredible gratitude to be here. We're the Jewish people. We know that life is the most important thing. So to be here at all is, I'm grateful, and holding at the same time the incredibly hard, awful, devastating, existential loss of everything that was testimony to my past, to my parents' pasts, to my own history that I was going to have to give to my daughter, so that she had things, touchstones back to those generations and to those stories, and that's all gone. So it's
wow,
it's from gratitude to pain, pretty quickly.
Well, and not only having that kind of pain, but it's still ongoing. The nightmare is still ongoing. The fire is still not out, and you have a community of also people that are technically homeless, and you don't have a synagogue yet to go back to. But we did see the images that was sent by Cantor Frankel of your being allowed into the synagogue, and the I guess the surprise and the miraculous fact that the synagogue is still standing. I imagine that just added to the emotion, but this time a little bit different than your home, huh?
Yeah, it did. It was very emotional to go there. We got a pass, through Jacob Sobroff with his press pass. We were able to enter the synagogue, and there's just no words for the incredible, overwhelming feeling that home, our home, is still standing, because everything else for many of us is gone. So to see that KI was standing when so much around it was burned to the ground was an incredible feeling of safety in this catastrophe where nothing was safe. Remains in so many ways.
It really is a miracle in so many ways, but at the same time, you also, you were saying before when we spoke, I mean, there were windows open, you came to a lot of debris and soot, and that's, even more impactful, knowing that it's coming from homes of people that you know and yourself.
Yeah, so that soot, those ashes on the floor of the synagogue is the life of our community in terms of everything that we had and had built, many of us over a lifetime. And to see that on the floor was profound. And this is the story of the Jewish people. That is not lost on me, that this is the story of the Jewish people for 3,000 years, is that it burns to the ground and we somehow clean it up and start again. And that's what we do over and over and over and over again. And we're going to have to do it this time too. And we will. That is who we are. Resiliency is baked into who we are. It's hard. The Jewish people has never shied away from saying how hard the work is to rebuild and how hard it is to maintain energy and hope and, motivation and all of those things. But we also are a people who just digs deep when we have to, and we do it. We rebuild. And as my colleague, Ed Feinstein, said so beautifully in a talk a few years ago, we are the 10th of Av Jews, the Jews who rebuild after the 9th of Av, start on the 10th of Av.
Yep.
And that's what we're doing. We're already starting to figure out how to be together in this, how to build momentum and some kind of forward energy, because it's going to take so much work. But the work has begun. This is the 10th of Av.
Wow, it's just, it's a very interesting analogy that you're making. And then also the 10th of Av, then you have the 14th of Av, and you have Tu B'Av. I guess this is also part of the journey of the Jewish people. Every holiday, we're depressed, we're happy, we're depressed, we don't eat. I mean, this is also in a way where comedy started as well, back in the days of the Borscht Belt and beyond. There's just something about the spirit that's just part of the glow of what we have done over so many years. So talk about that community and how those that have lost their homes and the fact you have this central location will provide a sanctuary during this time of grief and mourning.
We came through COVID living in lots of different places and somehow holding together as a community. So that really did tell me it's possible to stay together as a community even though we can't be together, all of us together in the same room when we want to be. So we have technologies from COVID that are going to help. That are going to help us be able to stay together. So that when we had the service Friday night at Sinai Temple, even though there was over 250 of us in the room, there were way more online. And so, people now, we have the technology in place to allow people to join us from wherever they are, and we're going to need that. And I think without the structure of KI standing, I don't know, but what I know is we have something to show people to say, we're coming back and we'll have a place to be together again, the place that we've celebrated and mourned so many times on so many occasions. We'll have it again. So that symbol is really important, I think, for people to believe it's possible for us to rebuild.
Wow, beautiful. Thank you so much, Rabbi Bernstein, for joining us, given that you're right in the thick of it and taking care of so many people. And we're sending you endless love and prayers for getting through this challenging time.
Thank you so much. And thank you, all of you who have expressed your care and concern for us. It makes us aware that we are part of a people. Then truly we are part of a people. People are reaching out from everywhere. And there's something so moving and so comforting about that. So thank you all for your care and wanting to hear from us.
Commemorations were held in Paris on January 9th to mark the 10-year anniversary of the Ipak Kasher attack in Paris, in which an ISIS-affiliated terrorist sieged a kosher supermarket, killing 4 people inside. This was the deadliest terror attack against Jews in France since 1982. And now, 10 years later, the anti-Semitic threat in France is not going away. Here's more from I-24 News correspondent Joe Brown.
As the French public marks the anniversary of the January 2015 terror attacks at the offices of satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo and at a kosher supermarket 2 days later, the prevalence of anti-Semitism in today's French society is impossible to ignore.
Who would have thought 10 years on that there would have been such an upsurge in anti-Semitic acts in France? Since the 7th of October 2023, there has been a more than 3-fold increase in anti-Semitic incidents. I would also like to say to those listening to us that our Jewish compatriots represent less than 1% of the French population, yet they are the victims of 57% of racist, anti-religious, and anti-Semitic acts. 1% on the one hand, 57% on the other.
On January the 9th, 2015, Malian-born French immigrant Amédi Koulibaly entered the Ipak Kasher supermarket in France, having just killed a police officer the day before. In his 4-hour-long siege, he killed 4 people and held another 15 hostage before police entered and killed him. He said it was in response to France's actions in the Middle East, and during the siege, he demanded that the perpetrators of the Charlie Hebdo attacks remain unharmed. But despite the largest anti-Semitic attack in France in over 30 years, the sentiment in the country is that things have not changed.
What happened here 10 years ago had causes that have not been resolved. We may have overcome the jihadist episode 10 years ago, but we know that Islamism is still on the rise in our country, that it continues to pose a daily threat to French people and to French Jews in particular.
A recent poll by French magazine Le Point shows that 1 in 5 young French people think that the Jews should leave the country, while 16% of total respondents said that Jews are to blame for the rising anti-Semitism in France. And anti-Semitic incidents are, indeed, rising. In the aftermath of the October 7th attacks, 2023 saw the highest number of anti-Semitic attacks recorded in France, with multiple incidents in 2024 suggesting that that unfortunate record could be broken.
The anti-Semitic tsunami of hatred for Israel and the Jews that we have been experiencing since October 2023 reminds us that what happened 10 years ago is obviously engraved in the collective memory, in the flesh of our country, but compels us not only to commemorate, but to fight against this hatred, against Islamism, and against all those who attack the values of the Republic and of France.
Aliyah applications from France increased almost threefold in the 12 months following October the 7th. So whilst the French public mourns alongside them, the third largest Jewish community in the world is keeping a firm eye on its future.
Global anti-Semitism is reaching a fever pitch around the world, and a new Anti-Defamation League poll reveals that nearly half of adults worldwide hold elevated levels of anti-Semitic beliefs and attitudes, which is an estimated 2.2 billion people when the world Jewish population is only 16 million. Joining us via Zoom from the U.S. is Marina Rosenberg, Senior Vice President of International Affairs at the Anti-Defamation League and former Ambassador of Israel to Chile. Thank you very much for being here. Sorry it has to be under these circumstances.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah.
And indeed, I wish we had some better news.
This is nothing surprising. We know the rising tide of anti-Semitic violence behavior has, just been making headlines since the October 7th massacre, and of course, the over year-long war. But the fact that 46% of adults in the world hold these beliefs is quite alarming.
Yes, indeed. It's alarming and not surprisingly, exactly as you said. We've been seeing the number of anti-Semitic incidents going up, especially post-October 7th. And it's not surprising, to me at least, that the number of people that are harboring anti-Semitic attitudes is also on the rise. And basically what we're seeing here is a global emergency of anti-Semitism. We're seeing it from the Middle East to Europe, from North America to Africa, and it can come from anyone and anywhere.
Yeah, also given Jews, let's just think about it. In the world, Jews only represent 0.2% of the population. So how does the research of the ADL explain this ongoing escalation and problem, that we know of has existed for thousands of years? I mean, such a small minority, yet the majority is continuing to call for a lot of bad things to happen to the Jewish people.
Yes, indeed. So there are a few explanations to what is going on in this tsunami of hate and anti-Semitism. So first of all, the post-October 7th, we have been seeing a rise in anti-Semitism in a very alarming way. And this is not just since Israel entered Gaza, but this was immediately post the atrocities of Hamas in Israel. We've seen it here in the US, we've seen it in Europe, and of course in the Middle East and other regions. Secondly, social media. ADL's Global 100 was launched 10 years ago in 2014. And back then, social media was not as prevalent as it is today. And today, though it's a very helpful tool, it's also a helpful tool for the haters and the anti-Semites, and it emboldens them to share publicly their anti-Semitic views. And thirdly, what we call is the Al Jazeera effect. In press and media around the world, where channels like Al Jazeera, but also Iran-backed channels like Press TV in Europe and Hispan TV in Latin America spread intentionally disinformation and anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist tropes against Jews and against Israel. And one important thing that comes from this survey that we just did at the end of 2024, 10 years after we launched it, is that the younger generation, the 18 till 34-year-old, harbor more elevated level of anti-Semitic attitudes. And basically what we're seeing around the world is a demographic time.
Yeah, and that is what is really so scary. I mean, we've seen it unfold before our very eyes on campuses, encampments, anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian marches. And the fact is that young people, because of social media, are also impressionable, don't have the experience of, listening to your sources, trying to see if it's true or not. How do you stabilize this out of control wildfire? I mean, what can actually be done, if anything?
Well, there's some good news coming out of this Global 100 survey, and it's that the majority of the adult population in the world, 57%, think that anti-Jewish hate is a major problem in the world. And why is it important? Because this means that governments and international organizations should take this support of the majority and take concrete, innovative actions against anti-Semitism. And this is why ADL calls for a whole-of-society approach in fighting anti-Semitism, not just the government, but academia, civil society, the private sector, and everybody in the general public should stand against anti-Semitism and innovate with new concrete steps against it.
Wow, thank you very much for your comprehensive summary of the situation. I'm Marina Rosenberg, Senior Vice President of International Affairs at the Anti-Defamation League. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
With a rich Jewish history in Syria dating back centuries and one of the oldest synagogues in the world in ruins, the rabbi of the Syrian Jewish community of Israel is taking matters into his own hands to breathe new life into the over 2,000-year-old Jobar synagogue. The son of Syria's last chief rabbi and the current chief rabbi of the Syrian community, Rabbi Binyamin Hamra, has penned a letter to Syria's new leader, Ahmed al-Shara, urging him to preserve the country's rich Jewish history. And we are happy now to be joined via Zoom by Rabbi Hamra. First of all, thank you for being here. And tell us more about your father's time as chief rabbi in Syria from 1976 to 1994. What was his experience there at that time before he left?
First of all, nice to meet you. I'm happy to be with you. My father, may he rest in peace, was the chief rabbi from 1976 to 1994. Before that, in 1972, he was an assisting rabbi to the chief rabbi who served before him. And from age 16, he was a teacher in a Torah school. And then from age 18, the principal. And so slowly he progressed. In the period of my father, he always told us that life in Syria was very enjoyable. It was permitted to practice Judaism, the synagogues, and all of our traditions and customs. It was possible to do so. Under Syrian law, it was permitted for each religion, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, to practice its customs, and so we did. We observed the Sabbath, and the holidays were special. But at the same time, there was also great complexity and difficulty, because we were frightened, perhaps to do or say something that could, God forbid, harm us, despite never having any ill intent towards anyone. That's how life was. On the one hand, great fear. On the other, a really good atmosphere. That's how we grew up. In those periods, there were limitations. From the 1970s, you couldn't go more than 3 kilometers from the Jewish quarter, called Harat al-Yahud, but slowly the restrictions eased. They eased restrictions on women who wanted to get married. For that end, you could send them to America. And so it progressed, slowly, until 1992, when my father received from Hafez el-Assad permission that all Jews in Syria, be they in Damascus, Aleppo, or Kamishli, could go all over the world, but not, of course, to Israel.
What would be, you did write a letter to Syria's new leader, Ahmed al-Shara. You mentioned that toppling Assad, a historic move due to God's providence. What would be ideal for him to do, not only for the Jewish community and the synagogue, but moving into the future?
What I wrote in the letter, and I don't get into internal Syrian matters, whether it's this government or the other, my late father tried to do everything for the Jewish community in Syria when he was chief rabbi of Syrian Jews in Israel. He never did anything against any Syrian government, and we're also not going to interfere in internal Syrian affairs. What we want is for everyone to live in health and peace, and that it will be good for everyone. From this point of view, I, as a rabbi, who knows whatever is going on in the world is through God's supervision, I believe that this historic process happened in the way that even the current government there seeks peace and dialogue, and that's what we expect. Like in all other countries, such as Iraq, Egypt, and Morocco, they all safeguarded the Jewish tradition, and those of other religions, be it Islam or Christianity, so we expect. We see that they really do want this, and we really hope and expect it to happen.
The Syrian community in the diaspora remains very strong. I imagine it's also very personal as well for them to help give the support to rebuild what is left of this over 2,000-year-old synagogue.
First of all, we truly want to say that from here, we lost one of the most well-known Jewish figures in Syria, Hadia Sitar. She passed away a week ago. This generation is indeed disappearing, but as you say, the Syrian Jewish community in the diaspora is very big, numbering hundreds of thousands of people. It's a very honourable community, and we're in contact with all possible figures, be they in America or Mexico, wherever they are, so we can make the best possible progress. We really expect and wish that from this moment we can come visit on the best possible side.
Also, are you, as well as Syrian expats throughout the diaspora, optimistic that the new regime will protect these priceless sites? And is there a hope of one day being in a place where people could actually go to Syria and reconnect with their roots and their great-grandparents and grandparents where they grew up?
As I said earlier, we hope the new government has its face towards peace, open to dialogue and understanding. Just as in all countries, they keep these things, the traditions. We expect and wish that with the new government, they will honour our traditions and customs. Just as we knew how to live in Syria with our Arab neighbours, and so far we are in contact with them outside of Syria. We yearn for the days that we will be able to come to see where our fathers and forefathers gave their souls to Judaism. That, with God's help, is what we expect.
I just want to add, in Arabic,
ونتأمل نحن والجالية كلها اليهودية اللي بأنحاء العالم إنه بنتأمل إنه نحن نحسن ونيجي نزور عن قريب جدا، وتحياتي وتقديري لكلهم، وإن شاء الله بعزات الشام بنشوف كل العالم بطريقة منيحة وطريقة تبع السلام وكله بيكون منيح.
And with God's help, everyone in the world will live in health and peace, because ultimately, and as our sages have said, there is no better blessing than peace. That is to say, every blessing in the world, be it Jewish, Muslim, or Christian, peace, that is the blessing. And if peace is the blessing, that is what we expect, and with God's help, we'll reach full redemption.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Rabbi Benjamin Hamra, Chief Rabbi of the Syrian community. Toda. Thank you all so much for joining us on Jewish World Weekly. I'm Emily Francis. We sure hope you enjoyed it. And of course, be sure to